Today we're looking at the book of Ruth. I tell you, I was just talking to Wayne and Haywood and Mary during the preliminaries, and just saying how this book of Ruth is just one of those books that I just enjoy just reading and going through. And I'm looking forward and excited about what the Lord's going to share with us as we go through this book. There's so much in here that it relates to. One of the things that I'm going to ask you to do, going through this book, see if you can find any absolute like miracle. And what you probably will see is like, well, I don't see the dead raising. I don't see the sick getting healed. I don't see blind eyes open. But in this book, you will see God. What this book will help you to recognize is in the ordinary, everyday aspects of your life, God is there. You may not see all kinds of wonderful things as far as super duper miracles. I'll just phrase it that way. You know, with all kinds of healing and miraculous things happening, and the dead rising, and the sea opening, and axe head floating. But you will see God in here. Now, what that will do, it will help us to recognize that if God is in the life of this ordinary story, He's in my life. He's here. He's working with you. He's involved. And He's going to work things out. Similar to how you see things worked out here in this book of Ruth. Now, deeper in the book, what you recognize is it tells the story of how we are redeemed. When I say we, I'm talking about all those that are considered to be called Gentiles. Because we were not part of the lineage of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob from a natural standpoint. But there was a redeemer that brought us in, a kinsman redeemer that brought us in because he was a near relative. That's why Jesus is so important, because God came as a near relative. How did He do that? He came in the form of sinful flesh. And that makes Him a kin to you and me. He's part of our family. And the kinsman redeemer concept that we read about when we went through the books of Leviticus and the book of Numbers is put in action in this story. So we see the law that was given to Moses actually actualized here in the book of Ruth. From a spiritual standpoint, that's how we get drafted in. We got grafted in because God redeemed us, because He was a man just like how we were. A man took us out of the innocent state that we were in from Adam and Eve, and Adam and Eve were the ones that took us out. And another man, Jesus, brought us back in. So this story talks about that. It gives a highlight about how that's happening and the legality aspects behind that. So without going any further deeper, because I could talk all day about some of the highlights, but let's just go ahead and get into the actual story of the book of Ruth. Let's take a listen here.
The book of Ruth, chapter 1. Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled, that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. And the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they came into the country of Moab, and continued there. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left, and her 2 sons. And they took them wives of the women of Moab. The name of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. And they dwelled there about 10 years. And Mahlon and Chilion died also, both of them, and the woman was left of her 2 sons and her husband. Then she arose with her daughters-in-law, that she might return from the country of Moab. For she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited His people in giving them bread. Wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was, and her 2 daughters-in-law with her, and they went on the way to return into the land of Judah. And Naomi said unto her 2 daughters-in-law,
Go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, as ye have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant you that ye may find rest, each of you, in the house of her husband.
Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voice and wept. And they said unto her, Surely we will return with thee unto thy people. And Naomi said,
Turn again, my daughters. Why will ye go with me? Are there yet any more sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn again, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have an husband. If I should say, I have hope, if I should have an husband also tonight, and should also bear sons, would ye tarry for them till they were grown? Would ye stay for them from having husbands? Nay, my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord is gone out against me.
And they lifted up their voice and wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clave unto her. And she said,
Behold, thy sister-in-law is gone back unto her people, and unto her gods. Return thou after thy sister-in-law.
And Ruth said, Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. Where thou diest will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. When she saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left speaking unto her. So they 2 went until they came to Bethlehem. And it came to pass, when they were come to Bethlehem, that all the city was moved about them. And they said,
Is this Naomi?
And she said unto them,
Call me not Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me. I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty. Why then call ye me Naomi, seeing the Lord hath testified against me, and the Almighty hath afflicted me?
So Naomi returned, and Ruth the Moabitess, her daughter-in-law, with her, which returned out of the country of Moab. And they came to Bethlehem in the beginning of barley harvest.
All right, there we go. This beautiful introduction to this particular story. And we see some things right off the bat that we can absolutely begin to talk about that's important to recognize. Now remember, I stated, see if you can find any kind of great miracle, like, raising the dead or opening blind eyes. And I'm going to tell you right now, you're not going to find that here. So then what I'm going to suggest to you is, tell me when you see God. Where is God interacting here? Then what you can do is, when you take that everyday, ordinary circumstance and you see the hand of God, then turn that to you in your ordinary, everyday circumstances and tell me, do you see God in your life? And the answer to that is, He is definitely there. He's there. You say, well, I have never seen the blind eyes open. I've never seen the dead raised. But that doesn't mean God's not there. And this book of Ruth is one testimony to that. From the standpoint of you even taking the time to join this gathering that we have and hear and learn and speak and talk and share about the Word of God is a miracle. You should recognize that God is working with you even in that aspect. All right, let's go ahead and get into the book of Ruth. All right, so it starts off, it says, now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled. Now, we just got finished with the book of Judges. We saw how bad things were, mainly because the people had begun to follow their own heart, their own thinking, their own lust. It would constantly say in the book of Judges that there was no king. people did that which was right in their own sight. Everything they thought was right. I don't really focus on what God says is right. I'm focusing on what I think is right. Now, when you do that, what do you produce? A nation of selfish people. How I see it. What's right for me. What's good for me. And so you don't think about how God thinks about it, how he's looking how to provide for all. So this was in the time that when the judges ruled. Okay? It doesn't tell us specifically which judge was ruling at this time, but you can just imagine they're living during this time when you had Gideon and Samson and Jephthah and all these other judges, Deborah, and all of them, going around during this time. Ruth is living in this time, and so is Naomi, who we're going to be introduced to in just a moment. All right, and then it says, during the time when the judges, in the days when the judges ruled, that there was a famine in the land. All right, so that tells us something else. This was, and you say, well, okay, do you see the hand of God here? Right here, I see God. Why? Because there's a famine? Yes. Because let's go back. We saw a famine during the time of who? Abraham. And what did Abraham do? He left and went to another country. Right? We saw the famine in the time of Isaac. And what did Isaac do? He left and went to another country. What country did they go to? They went to Egypt. We saw this also in the time of Jacob. Right? And by that time, you remember Joseph had already been separated and Jacob thought his son was dead. But Joseph was already in Egypt. But there was a famine in the land, and Jacob and all his family went to another land. They went to Egypt as well. And so now we see here there's another famine. And similar to what happened, and in each of those occasions, something bad happened when they went there that caused an issue down the road. Well, let's see what happens here. So there was a famine in the land. And let me just also add to that. Generally, the famine is happening because the individual has a struggle with trusting God, believing in God. And so we know that in the days of Judges, that was the struggle that they had. They weren't believing and trusting in God. Okay? So the famine is in the land. And it says, a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah. Now, that's important, because it's telling you the region where they are. Bethlehem in Judah. Who was born in Bethlehem?
Jesus.
Who's the lion of the tribe of Judah?
Jesus.
So we recognize that this is Jesus's ancient kinfolks, and we see that in the lineage, the line of ancestors that is listed in the book of Matthew. There's also one in the book of Luke as well. And so we see that we're looking at Jesus's ancient relatives going back. There's also another person that's going to be born here, not too far from here, and that's King David. This is also the lineage of King David. So that's why when Joseph and Mary had to go to their original land to be taxed, they went to Bethlehem, Judah, which then helped fulfill the prophecy of Jesus being born in Bethlehem, even though his parents were living in Nazareth. It's beautiful. So once again, what do we see? I see God here. Right? Ain't no blind eyes open, but I see the presence of God. Charmaine is talking about she's coming from Virginia, and there's a reason why she has family in Virginia and lives where she lives now. God is working things out. Things would not be the way they are. God had plans, and we got to recognize that God's plans are in action in all the things that we do. All right, so let's keep going. So there was a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. So now, this man is leaving Bethlehem, Judah, the place of the origins and the birth of our Lord Jesus, to go to the land of Moab. All right. Now, we look at the land of Moab. Let's go back and look at the history of this. We know that Moab connects all the way back to Lot. Because when Lot was in Sodom and Gomorrah, now we're going all the way back to where? Sodom and Gomorrah. And when Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed, Lot was brought out by the angel. Him, his wife, and his 2 daughters. Looks similar here. Here's a man, his wife, and his 2 sons. Similar. All right? And so, but then remember that the daughters were so traumatized that they believed that there was no man left for them. So they decided to take things in their own hands, got the father drunk, laid with the father, and had children by the father. The daughters did. And so then one of the children was named Ammon. The other child was named Moab. That's the beginning. So we see the connection of Moab. So Moab, from a standpoint, is not from a standpoint of how people see and worship and think about God. It's not equivalent to Bethlehem, Judah. So they're leaving the place where the Lord Jesus is going to be born to a place that's connected to Sodom and Gomorrah. That's where they're headed. They're not even heading to Egypt like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob did. They're going to Moab. Okay? All right? And so he's bringing himself, his wife, and his 2 sons. Look at verse 2. And the name of the man was Emmaus. And the name of his wife was Pleasant. Now, Emmaus is translated, it means God is king. And Naomi is translated, her name means pleasant. Right? So here's a man that believes God is king, but he's leaving because he doesn't believe that God can sustain him in the famine. It's amazing sometimes when we run away from the problems that God wants to bring us through. And why would you do that? Because everybody's doing what's right in his own eyes. I'm not going to stay here in this famine. I see something better. I see that they got some food in Moab. But Moab is not a good place. They don't have, remember Balaam? And remember when Balak tried to hire Balaam to curse Israel? And he couldn't do it. He was unsuccessful. And then so Balaam came and told Balak, well, I can tell you how you can get them to curse themselves. You know those women of Moab? You know how they are. Those women of Moab are very, lovely and beautiful, and they have all these different things that they do that everybody is intrigued about. Have them women walk around and present themselves and prance around the men of Israel, and the men of Israel will lust after them and bring the wrath of God on themselves. So that shows you the consistent thinking and reputation of Moab, and especially the Moabitess women. Okay. But you know what? Someplace else in the Bible, you know what it says? Though your sins be red as crimson, they shall be what? White as snow. There's nobody so bad that God can't deliver, save, redeem. So they're going to a bad place. It kind of reminds me of the prodigal son. He's leaving his father's house to go to a far country. And guess what's going to happen? He's going to have some struggles in that far country. And so is this man. Elimelech is going to have some struggles in this far country. And let's see if we can identify and point out some of the things that he's dealing with. So he's now dealing with, his name was Elimelech, and the name of his wife was Naomi. And Naomi is an important character in this story. And the name of his 2 sons, Mahlon and Chilion, Ephraites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they came unto the country of Moab and continued there. Now, let's look at the two sons. Mahlon, which means unhealthy, and Chilon, which means puny. So we got some people here, we got two people that are not really the best of health. All right? They're not, statues of how you should be. So they would, and a lot of times the names have a lot to do with how you're observed or presented, or how you look, or your personality. A lot of times those names meant something more than how they do today in our day. All right? Verse 3. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. All right. So now he's in the land of Moab, and the first thing that happened, this man that brought his family out, guess what happens to him? He dies in this foreign land. All right. So now he's there, but he doesn't get a chance to see anything that God can do, and how God can bring him out. He's dead. He died in that land. And she was left of her two sons. So now Naomi no longer has a husband. All she's got left is her two sons. Look at verse 4. And they took them wives of the women of Moab. The name of one was Oprah, the name of the other Ruth. And they dwelt there about 10 years. So now the two sons, unhealthy and puny, Mahlon and Chilon, they get wives in Moab, Oprah and Ruth. And they dwelt there 10 years. Okay, now, what is this telling us? You say, well, it's just telling us they lived there 10 years. But it's also telling you things it is not saying. What is it not telling you? You lived there and you married to this woman for how long? 10 years. What's missing? Children. 10 years, you get no children. So what's going on with Oprah and with Ruth? That's generally where the problem was laid at the feet of the women. Remember, Abraham had problems, right? His wife could not conceive. And his wife Sarah tried to figure out a way and said, well, you know what? I'm going to give you my concubine because I'm not giving you what you want. I'm not giving you what you need. So I'm going to give you my concubine. All right? And so she saw that after a period of time, we got to get some children in here. All right? And so we see that they're living there for 10 years. Now, we recognize, and we will see and be able to prove this out later, that it's not the women's fault. It's unhealthy and puny. It's their fault. It's Mahlon and Chilon. Those are the ones that ain't producing the kids. Ain't nothing wrong with Oprah and Ruth. All right? But we won't know that until we get further along into the story. But I can give you a heads up, a preview of that's the issue. All right? So look at verse 5. It says, and Mahlon and Chilon died. Why? Well, they were unhealthy to begin with. Okay? It says, also, both of them and the women were left of their two sons and husband. All right, so now, all that's left now, all the guys are dead. The father that brought them out and the two sons. Who's left? Only the women. Now, what does that speak to? It speaks to now they have no covering, no protection, no sense of male guidance, which you needed in that day. And now all you have here is these three women with no male counterparts. In a foreign land, as far as Naomi is concerned, Ruth and Oprah are in their own land, but chose to marry these foreigners that came into the land, and now their husbands are dead. They have no children. There's no sense of renewing of life and continue on, or let's take our struggles and bring it to the new generation, because there is no new generation listed here. Okay? So look at verse 6. Then she, and that she is Naomi, arose with her daughter-in-laws, and that she might return from the country of Moab. Now she's ready to what? I'm leaving Moab. Why? Because all that happened while I was in Moab was death. I had two celebrations. I got my unhealthy and puny sons married, but they died. And so now, all I have now is the memory of being in Moab, is the memory of death. Sometimes you can be in a place where it's like, you know what, this ain't for me. I can't stay here. You know, and sometimes you got to get a understanding that I have to leave. Now, I asked, do you see the hand of God anywhere? Why is this burden to go on Naomi's heart? Who do you think put it there? God. I could tell you so many stories about how I look back and how different decisions. I remember when my wife told me when we was broke. I mean, when I'm talking about broke, had no money. She's like, yeah, we gotta go buy a house. I'm like, buy a house? I can barely pay the rent. And she said, we got to go. God put that on her heart. And I could tell you, it's a long story, but the bottom line was, you know, we ended up here in Beacon. And there's so much that I can talk about how I can see the hand of God when I look back now. And so I'm saying this because here in this book of Ruth, you just say that, okay, Naomi just decided I'm going to return to my country. That was a decision she made. Well, we can see that this was a decision that was put on her heart by God. And I bring it out and I point it out because these are things that you have to learn to investigate and decide for yourself. Do I see God in my decision? Now, somebody will say, well, where was God when her husband died? And where was God when her two boys died? He was right there.
Right here.
You forget we're living in the land of sin. We're living in a place where sin resides. We're living in the land where death and destruction, where it's the God of this land is the God that desires to seek and to see whom he can devour. And the beauty is that in the land of everything being destroyed and devoured and destructing, God preserves. So it's the important thing is not that things break and die and decay. Everything decays in this land. The beautiful thing is if anything is renewed, if anything is kept, that's the miracle. The miracle is the fact that you didn't die yesterday. That's the miracle. Because the ruler of this land wants everything to die. There's a miracle every spring when we see the flowers and the bushes and the trees in the northern hemisphere areas where things die during the winter come back to life. That's a sign, and it's a marker that God can do these things. You go, well, that's not a miracle. That's just how plants work. It's still a pointer to how God is. That's his nature. That he can bring life out of death. Now, Naomi is looking at death threefold. My husband and my two children. They didn't get raised from the dead. They were buried. But now Naomi in that is now starting the transaction that's going to produce new life. She doesn't know it yet, but she is. And that's the same thing that happens with us. There are things that can start and begin that are going to produce new life. You just got to believe and trust and have faith in God that he can work it out, even though he doesn't tell you right off the bat what he's doing. All right, let's keep going. All right, it says, so she's going to return from the country of Moab. Why? For she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread. The famine is over. I'm heading back. I'm going to take what I got left and I'm going to go back. Look at verse 7. Wherefore she went forth out of the place where she was and her two daughters. They started the journey all together. Her two daughters-in-law with her. And they went on the way to return unto the land of Judah. They're going back to the land that's described as the Lion of the tribe of Judah, where Jesus is born. All right. Verse 8. And Naomi said unto her daughters. Now, you look at this and you go, okay, she's just saying something very logical. But what she's doing here is breaking out that which is real versus that which is not real. Remember, Jesus told the story about the man that planted the wheat, and then later on, when men slept, the enemy came in and sowed tares amongst the wheat. And then they said, should we go out and take the tares out? And he said, no, because they all look alike. And you might accidentally pull out a wheat and instead of a tare. So let them both grow together. And God will separate. Well, when you got two people that look like they're all doing the same thing, but one of them is not the same as the other, how do you separate them? Well, let's look at this little situation here. Verse 8. And Naomi said to her two daughter-in-laws, go return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you as ye have dealt with the dead and with me. So Naomi said, y'all, you know what? I'm heading back to my land, but y'all don't have to follow me. Y'all go back to your own mother's house. And may God bless you on your journey back and deal with you in your future as kindly as you guys have dealt with me. Okay? Verse 9. The Lord grant you that ye may find rest, each of you, in the house of her husband. So he's saying, y'all go back to your mother's land and you shall find another husband. You can get married again. And so this is very logical statements that Naomi's making. She doesn't recognize that she's bringing out she's going to point out the deep character, the differences between these two women. Oprah and Ruth, they look alike. Remember, all the women of Moab were beautiful women, and all the women of Moab had, great, representations of just being like great wives. So she knows, you guys go back, you'll find a husband. Anybody would be happy to marry you guys, right? And then she says, but let me just say this before I finish reading again. But in those two women, which outwardly look alike, they're both beautiful. They both have great attributes of being a wonderful wife, but there's something different between them. How do you find the difference? God knows the difference. And God's going to allow Naomi to go through everyday activity, and it will point out the one that's different from the other. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. Everybody's crying. Naomi, Oprah, and Ruth. Everybody's crying. Everybody seems sad. Everybody seems brokenhearted. Let's keep reading. Verse 10. And they said unto her, surely we will return with thee unto thy people. Now, both women say this, Oprah and Ruth. We're going with you, Naomi. We're going to go back and dwell with your people. Why? Well, they've been with Ruth for how long? 10 years.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, not Ruth. They've been with Naomi for 10 years. All right? And so they're like, we're going to go back. We're going to be with your people. You're our family now. So, but Naomi's going to dig a little deeper. Look what she says. And Naomi said, turn again, my daughters. Why will ye go with me? He's asking, why? Why are you doing this? For what purpose? Are there yet any more sons in my womb, that they may be your husband? Speaking to the kinsman redeemer. Remember, if the brother was to die, the brother was to become the wife or take care of the widow of his brother and bear children, and the children would be part of that dead brother's lineage. And so Naomi's speaking to that. Verse 12. Turn again, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. If I should say, I have hope, if I should have a husband, also tonight, and should also bear sons. If something wonderful was to happen, and I did find a husband and got pregnant tonight, all right, and I bear sons. Look at 13. Would ye tarry for them till they were grown? Would you stay for them from having husbands? Would you not marry somebody else that maybe came along waiting for them to get old enough to be able to be your husbands? No, you're not going to do that. That's robbing the cradle. That's not going to happen. She says, nay, my daughters, for it grieves me much for your sake that the hand of the Lord is going out against me. All right, so she's recognizing the fact that this tragedy happened to me, that I don't have a husband, he's dead, and I no longer have the sons, your husbands, they're gone. And Naomi is taking on the aspect that I feel that the tragedy is happening because I'm out of God's will. I'm not doing what God wanted me to do. And that's why I'm returning. I'm going back. We all got to do things sometimes a little different than how we did it before. I've said this before and I'll say it again. We all know what we need to do a lot of times. We know what we should be, and we just don't do it. Why? Because we don't like it, don't want it, don't care for it. Too much effort, too much work. Rather do something else. Whatever it is, we all oftentimes choose not to do the things we know. Now, we do a lot of things that we do know, and it's not everything. It's just that one or two things. I know I need to do this, but I'm not doing it. I can't do this. It's too much for me. But you should do it. So you got to get faith and confidence to do it. Right? And that's what Ruth is going to point out here. But let's get to that in a minute. So he says, let me read this part again. For it grieves me much for your sakes that the hand of the Lord is going out against me. Look at verse 14. They lifted up their voice and wept. They're all crying again. And Oprah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth cleaved unto her. Now, Oprah gave her a kiss, and it was a kiss of what? Goodbye. But Ruth did what? Cleave or clung. I'm not kissing you goodbye. Ruth is not giving her a kiss. Oprah's kiss was a kiss of like, okay, I'll see you later, or I won't see you, goodbye, I won't see you at all. All right? And Oprah's like, and Ruth is like, no, I'm hanging on. I'm clinging to you. I'm going to cleave to you. All right? And look at verse 15. And she said, behold, thy sister-in-law is gone back unto her people and unto her gods. See, that right there is the difference. Oprah will serve the gods that's in front of her. The gods that's in front of me, that's the gods I serve. There's a lot of people like that. There's an old song, if you can't be with the one you love, love the one you're with. Well, guess what? That ain't love. And I'm just going to love you because you're the closest one to me. That ain't it. And that's the thing that this book is pointing out a love story. It's a great love story. Right? And we're going to get to some more of this in just a moment. But the key here is that Ruth is like, no, this is not going to happen. I'm not going to go back. I'm going to allow you and what your future is to be mine. But Naomi is saying, look at what your sister-in-law did. She's going back to her people and to her gods because she had no long-term full connection to the gods that Naomi served. Right? And because she's like, well, your gods didn't treat you good. Well, she don't have faith in those gods. Remember the story that Jesus told about the seeds that were sown and how some of them were sown amongst the rocks and they sprung up quickly, but then when the sun came out, they died. And other ones were sown in the thorns and the thistles, and they grew up, but then later the thorns and the thistles, speaking about the cares of this world, choked out the seeds. There's a lot of people that start and look good, but if you dig deep, there are other things that will eventually pull them from walking with God. And so now Naomi's logical concept about where you're going to find husbands. You're going to go into my people, nobody in my land is going to marry you. This is her thinking. And so Oprah hears the logic and follows it. Ruth is hanging on to what? Faith and hope and trust and love. I'm not going to abandon you because it's logical. I'm going to stay with you because I love you. Now, let's keep reading. And so Oprah is going back to her people and to her gods. Look at what Ruth says, verse 16. And Ruth said, entreat me not. In other words, don't keep telling me this stuff. To leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go. And where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God. So she's made a decision. I'm going to choose the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, let's pause here. Do you see the hand of God? I see the hand of God here. I see it in multiple ways. Number one, before Elimelech ever decided to take his wife and his two sons out of Bethlehem, Judah, there was already a woman named Ruth in Moab that had a heart to believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, how are you going to get this woman that's in Moab to get to connect to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Because in her heart is the faith to believe. Well, God used this man Elimelech, who already was, I'm not happy here. Well, if you ain't happy, I'm going to move you on out. And his circumstances got Ruth entangled into people that are from Bethlehem, Judah. And now this woman that had this in her heart that only God could see produced circumstances to bring her out of Moab. See, not everybody in Moab is a devil. There's a lot of bad areas that people live in, but not everybody in there is bad. And that's what we recognize. See, God's chosen people are the Israelites, and we are Gentiles. But not all Gentiles are bad. There's some Gentiles that got a heart to believe in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, if they are brought to that attention. And that's what happens to us. That's why we are grafted in. Thank God for Jesus that left his home in heaven, came down to our place that is just like Moab, pretty bad, and brought us with him to his eternal existence. That's what the Lord has done for us. And that's what Ruth is saying. I just want to stay connected. I believe that following you is better for me, because I want to be like your people that are the chosen people, and I want to be serving the God that you serve, because your God, even though what I've seen was death, I believe there is greatness and actual life if I continue to stay with you. Now that's love. All right? And look at this, read verse 17. It said, where thou diest, this is Ruth speaking, I will die. So she's saying, till what? Death do us part. Now, you know what most people will say if you look at two women that are talking like this to each other? You know what people are going to say? That they are two lesbians in our day. These are two women. Ooh, they love each other like this till death do their part. And you know what? This to me shows you something that is missing from the conversation. These two women love each other. But because they love each other, they don't have to lust after each other to fulfill their lustful desires. That's the difference. So when people say, you can't tell me who I can love, I go, yeah, if you're using the proper wording for love, the proper definition for love. Nobody can tell you how to love. You should be able to love who you want to love. But the issue is, that's not what they're talking about. What they really want to say, and what they are actually saying, you can't tell me who I can't lust and lavish after. Because that's what they want to do. It's a difference. So you bring Ruth and Naomi and take this conversation and bring it in our day, people will say, oh, these are two lesbians. And it's not. And God's showing you how you can love a person and not lust after them. That's the difference. We're going to get more into this down the road, but it's amazing how people are not able to see the difference between the two in our day, because our day doesn't point out the difference. Our day makes them the same, make them they're absolutely the same. No, you can love a person and then absolutely want just the best for them without having to say, well, you also got to just be, my little fling and thing on the side. There's a lot more I could say on that, but let me move along. So let me just read 17 again. Where thou diest, I will die. Where thou, and there will I be buried. The Lord do to me and more also, if aught but death part thee and me. This is Ruth's statement. This is the person that was living in Moab. You can now see why God is going out and fishing her out of Moab and bringing. That's a miracle. God's bringing this woman out of Moab because this is the kind of heart she had. This is the spirit that's in Ruth. And guess what? She's going to be the great grandmother of King David. And she's a descendant. Jesus is a relative of her. She is a descendant of Jesus, natural birth. But she came from Moab. And we've talked already about those women in Moab, all the reputation that they got. But she's a good woman. All right. The Bible says, he that findeth a good woman, or findeth a wife, findeth a what? A good thing.
Good thing.
All right, let's keep going. Verse 18. When she saw that she was steadfast minded to go with her, then she left speaking unto her. So Naomi's like, well, I can see me making a conversation with you is not going to change your mind. So let's go then. Let's head on back. Verse 19. So they two went until they came to Bethlehem. And it came to pass when they were come to Bethlehem that all the city was moved about them. And they said, is this Naomi? Wow. They looking at Naomi coming back by herself with this Moabitess woman. This is Naomi? Where's your sons? Where's your husband? And who was this woman? Verse 20. And she said unto them, call me not Naomi. Why? Her name means pleasant. And she is not feeling pleasant. Don't call me pleasant. I'm not having a good time. Look what Naomi said. Call me Mara, right? Which means bitter. Now, God is working out something here. But how is Naomi feeling? Bitter. It's an amazing thing to me that oftentimes God works out things, and in the process of working it out, part of the ingredients that go into it is bitterness. Something that's bitter, something that's not good tasting. You know, when you make a cake, you put in a lot of ingredients. Some of the ingredients taste bitter by themselves. But once you put them together, you mix them all in, you put the right heat, the right time together, it comes out beautiful. But right now, all Naomi can see is bitterness. It says, now why is she saying call me bitter? She says, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me. I want you to call me bitter because God has dealt bitterly with me. Now what God is doing, God did that to break the decision made by your husband. Your husband was the one that decided to take you and the two boys down to Moab. And now God has done this, so now you can be what? Brought back. But right now you don't see it. Because what? We're just mixing the ingredients. And it don't taste good. Okay? Look at verse 21. I went out full and the Lord have brought me home again empty. From her standpoint, she's like, I have nothing. And she's not even counting this Moabitess woman called Ruth. She's just following me because, I don't know, she's got something in her brain and in her mind that she don't want to leave me. I gave her very logical reasons why she should go back, but she ain't going back. She's following me for some other reason, which we will find later. And as Ruth has already stated, she loved her mother-in-law. She loved her. So then Naomi goes back and says, why call ye me Naomi, seeing the Lord has testified against me, and the Almighty has afflicted me? I have gotten a behind whooping. Remember the story like we had pointed out of the prodigal son? Remember he left? He took his money, his inheritance, and he went to a far country. But then there was what? A famine in the land. And what did the famine do? Made him to the point where he was feeding the pigs, and the food he was feeding to the pigs started looking good to him. And he said, I'm going to come to myself, and I'm going to go what? Go back to my father's house. He said, even the servants are eating better than I'm eating. So this return, we see the similarities here. There's a returning. Naomi's returning. And no matter how she's feeling about the return, this is just a hard thing for me. This is a tough life. I'm not happy with anything that's going on. I'm just going to return. And yet, at the same time, God is working. See, we can see God working even in the brokenhearted. We can see God working even in sad and difficult circumstances. We can see that in the book of Ruth. The question is, do you see it in your own life? When you go through the difficulties, when you go through the heartaches, when you feeling bitter and like God is giving you a whooping, do you see God working? Now we can see it in Ruth's story here. We can see it here because we know what's going to happen. But you also got to have that same kind of faith that God is working it out for you too. All right. Verse 22. So Naomi returned, and Ruth, the Moabitess. Who? The Moabitess. Her daughter-in-law with her, which returned out of the country of Moab. Just in case you didn't know what a Moabitess was, is letting you know she's a Moabitess and she's coming out of Moab. Now, one thing we will say, that when the people saw Naomi and they saw Ruth, the one thing that they probably observed was that Ruth was a very attractive person. But she's a widow. And she's not a Hebrew. So, other than just her being attractive, she has no other thing going for her. So they think. We'll find out later that she does. And they came to Bethlehem in the beginning of the barley harvest. Now, a little hint there. Because remember, Naomi had heard that the Lord had allowed bread to begin to grow in the land of Bethlehem, Judah. And that's why she headed back. And she happened to get there just at the time of the barley harvest. That's important. Because the barley harvest is going to have a major connection to what's going to happen next. All right? And I won't give you any teasers. You just got to tune in next week if the Lord say the same, and we'll find out why the barley harvest has a connection. All right?
Tune in next week.
Tune in next week. That's it. Any comments or questions on what we talked about so far?